you're going to get defensive. I have a defensive reaction literally every single day. Every day, there's something. The key for me is that I'm aware now. I notice it, and I'm able to much faster identify what is the story in my head? What am I telling myself here? Okay, how is this actually about my own insecurities? How is this rooted in my own self-acceptance gaps? And then I can recover that much faster from the defense mechanism to come back to a much more open and collaborative space.
I'm Amy Woodall, and this is The Conscious Habit, a show from the People Forward Network. We're teaching you how to incorporate love and consciousness at work, at home, and the world at large. You just heard from Dr. Laura Gallaher. She is the founder of Gallaher Edge, and y'all, our work is so aligned in this world. We loved geeking out on this. Our passions are so similar. We both want to help leaders and their teams learn how to navigate challenges from the inside out, move beyond their defense mechanisms, aka the ego, be more authentic, lead with love. We were kind of giggling about how just aligned our philosophies and our passions are in the world. And I think, you know what, that really speaks to the fact that consciousness and wisdom is far greater than the individual mind. It is tapped into at a whole different level than just the individual mind can hold. So Gallaher Edge, Dr. Laura, she's got a background in organizational psychology and leadership coaching, and she and her team help individuals unlearn old patterns, recognize those defense mechanisms, develop deep self-awareness so that they can fuel authentic leadership and healthier company cultures. One of my favorite things we talked about in this episode is this convergence between self-acceptance and self-improvement. So many times high achievers and perfectionists think that those things are one and the same. And so there's this fear of fully loving and accepting themselves because they think that equals complacency. And I love that Dr. Laura shares, those are not one and the same. They are not mutually exclusive, that they are different journeys. While they're very complementary, one does not negate the other. So I would love to hear more from you after you hear this episode and what really stood out to you and where you think you are. I encourage you to go take the assessment that you're going to hear us talk about that she has available on her website. And yeah, stay tuned. Take a listen. Hey, Conscious Habit listeners. So our guest today, by the way, Cy Wakeman told me kind of previous of us recording with her on the podcast, she said maybe we shared a life together. Hey, maybe we were the same person in a former life. And I feel that way about our guest today and the work that she does, because I know, just forgive me if throughout this podcast I just start screaming amen. It's probably going to happen because our belief systems are so aligned in the work that we do in the world. We've got Dr. Laura Gallaher on the podcast today, and she's the founder of Gallaher Edge, and she is helping make the world more conscious, specifically cultures more conscious. And she believes in the rule of inside out, that life happens and we lead from the inside out. So I'm so excited to hear your take and just be able to geek out on this information together. So welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me, Amy. And I am equally excited about geeking out, even just learning about the name of your show and everything. I was like, yes, this is my person.
Yes, good. It takes a village of us in the world to do this work. And so I think this is good for anybody listening. You're going to have other people who do what you do. Okay. And you can see them as competition, or you can see them as ways to elevate, because if they're out doing this good work in the world, it elevates everything that you're going to do. It's serving a greater mission beyond just you. So yeah, I'm always thrilled to meet people. And I've had some people who were potential guests who are like, "Oh, I don't think you're going to want to have me on. Our work is very aligned." And I'm like, "That's exactly why I want you on the show."
That's the point.
Yes.
Yeah, and I'm totally with you. And I believe that a rising tide raises all ships. And I think that, even the word conscious it's not as prevalent as I want it to be in our world. I want more people to have heard about it, and I want them to know what it is. Like when I've used that language before, sometimes people look at me and they go, what does that mean though? And I'm very happy to tell them, but I am excited for the day when the majority of people that I speak to about this, I say it and they're like, ah, yes, and they get
Yeah.
it.
No disclaimer. Well, that's why I think this is a great lead in. I ask every guest, what is your definition of consciousness? Because I do think that there are a lot of ways to look at it. And it is so misunderstood that it's interesting to kind of see what is our take. So when people say that to you, like, what does that even mean? How do you explain it to them?
The simplest way that I like to break it down is around awareness. I think that that's the way that seems to resonate the most with people. I think that it can sound overly simple to call it awareness, but it's higher and higher levels of awareness and being able to recognize how much I can be in the seat of the observer and be higher and higher in my consciousness rather than being so wrapped up in, ego and all of those subconscious things that influence our behavior, which is like most of it. Right. We are driven hugely by our subconscious. And so the effort to work to become more conscious and bringing more consciousness into organizations is about having higher awareness, having less running on autopilot, less default, and more intentionality, more awareness.
Love that. What's the metacognition, right? The seer that sees, the watcher who watches. Do you remember the time in your life when you were kind of aware of like, oh, wow, my brain is thinking rather than I am my thoughts. Do you remember when that happened for you?
I think that I've had a couple different big moments in my life that I didn't even necessarily put together as the same awareness for myself. But what stands out to me, what first popped up when you asked that question, Amy, was actually reading Michael Singer's book, The Untethered Soul.
Yes. Same.
Yeah.
I'm telling you, we shared a life. Like that was
It's
2017. I read The Untethered Soul and I've never seen the world the same again.
same. And I listened to it on Audible, and I've listened to it multiple times. And every time I listen to it, while I'm listening to it, like literally while I'm listening to it, and then the rest of that day, I feel different. Like I have elevated my awareness and I'm more in that observer seat because I've brought it back into my consciousness. And he does such a great job. It was amusing and like a little annoying and frustrating the very first time that I was reading the book because he's so like, no, but who are you? I was like, what do you mean? But that recognition of like, well, I guess I'm not my body. I guess I'm not my thoughts. I'm not just my name. I'm not just my profession. So wait, yeah, who am I? And it was a very heady way to begin to think about it. But then I could see how much more that was true. And then I started to bring so much more different language into how I would speak about my own experience, not over-identifying with it, not over-attaching with it. And so that's the first answer that stood out to me is reading that book, which was around the same time as what you said.
Yeah, there was definitely an aha and I too listened to that book and then bought it. So I, like had the physical copy as well. But there was when they talked about the inner roommate, I was like, oh my God, I was so hyper aware of like, there is this little voice inside and it talks nonstop. In the office I was working in at the time, we started lovingly referring to that voice as Jerry, like our roommate Jerry. And so but it really helps shine this light on like, yeah, there are these thoughts and most of them are nonsensical and they're not relevant for now and they're automatic. So for you, when you read that book, were you already doing this work in some capacity or did that lead you further into this work? What was that relationship to your aha and the work you do in the world?
I was already doing this work, yeah. And so I was saying there were a couple different moments that stood out to me. And the other one that had come to mind is back in like 2014, I was doing some work with a mentor of mine named Judy Bell, genius woman, incredible intuition, incredibly deep knowledge of psychology and, impact of early life experiences on ongoing self-concept. And she had this whole concept of like the boardroom in your head. And so where Michael Singer might talk about it as your roommate that never shuts up, she invited us to actually recognize who are some of the different voices that are speaking to us. And a lot of her work and a lot of my work too is now about, okay, so how can we differentiate then if the voice in my head is what she would call like an angel voice or a traitor voice, and the traitor voice is just a fallen angel, somebody who wants to help you, right? They have good intentions, and something about their delivery or something about their messaging is not actually congruent with where you're wanting to go. And so that idea had been introduced to me, a few years earlier as well, just being able to identify those voices. And I was really focused for myself on like the inner critic in particular. And then what I would call the inner champion. Sometimes I'd say inner cheerleader, but like inner champion, and the inner critic and the inner champion, and how much louder the critic was, and how she would start almost every sentence with, yeah, but brutal. Like she, my champion wanted me to feel good about something, and it was very quiet voice. And like the critic would just come in and immediately find all the things wrong with it. And having the awareness of those different voices and how, okay, they all want to help me, so I don't have to vilify any of them. I also don't have to be at their mercy, was like a huge, huge epiphany moment for me.
Yeah, it is nice when it's like you just find power over it, right? When it's like, it's not me, so therefore, like I can control it, which is great. You and your team get to go around and work in organizations. And I know a lot of the work that you do is helping to develop conscious cultures. And obviously there's deep, we'll get into all of the areas and kind of how that's broken down into the individual. But tell me a little bit about how would organizations know if they're like, we have a conscious culture or we have an unconscious culture? What is sort of the matrix in which they might judge that for themselves?
Gosh, I mean, obviously it's not a pure dichotomy, right? Most things are not. It's totally a spectrum. But the key thing that I would probably invite people to notice is defense mechanisms, is what I would say to look for. Now, the most common defense mechanism that you're going to see inside an organization is blame. So when something goes wrong, whether it's big or small, what is the reaction that people tend to have? And of course, not everybody's going to react the same, but do you notice finger pointing and blame happening when something has gone wrong? If the sales department isn't hitting their numbers, are they personally accountable and looking for their own contribution and really focused on their learning and growth? Or are they pointing the finger over at the marketing department saying, well, we didn't get enough sales qualified leads. If they give us the right kind of leads, maybe we'd hit our numbers, right? Like what's the vibe, right? What's kind of the feeling? And so look for blame. That's going to be a sign that you've got a lot of people that are operating in that more unconscious space of self-preservation, which is not problem solving. But there are so many other defense mechanisms that can pop up too. You've got the victim. So sometimes in organizations, you'll see people kind of lean into feeling like, oh, you're criticizing me, and like, oh, this is always so hard for me. And like that kind of lack of accountability also is a sign that people are operating in that like self-preservation rather than problem-solving mode. And that's usually where we start our work too. So when we're working with the leaders in the organization, first thing we ask them to do is begin to notice their own defense mechanisms. Like, what does this look like for you?
What do you see being the most common? Do you, because it does take a level of awareness for people to be able to recognize that they have this and not, there's so many people, and I was like this at some point in time in my life where I was only aware of external factors. I wasn't always aware of kind of intrinsic responses that would happen. But when you're having this conversation with leaders, is there a pattern that you see that tends to come up with many people, or what do they tend to self-discover?
So one of the things that we do, we have this one-page survey called a Signs of Defensiveness survey. And it's been put together, after years of working with different participants who say, well, this is something that I tend to do when I'm feeling defensive. And it's a way to immediately increase everybody's awareness around what their signs of defensiveness could look like. Because we're very creative as human beings. And so even though the defense mechanism is always ultimately wanting to protect you from the same thing, which is feeling not enough on the inside, the way that we display it can be very, very different. In fact, you might have people with the same exact internal fear, but their behavior is exact opposite. And that opposite behavior, they tend to kind of like feel pitted against each other because they look at that and they're like, well, who does that? But it's the same internal fear. We peel back the layers. It's like, oh, we're all actually really very, very similar. So as an example, I've mentioned blame. I've mentioned playing the victim. Sarcasm is really common. So people leaning into sarcasm, people using humor to deflect. It could just even be like inappropriate laughing, or giggling is one. One that surprises people a lot is being too nice. So being too nice, absolutely a defense mechanism, right? And it's this like fear of conflict that leads somebody to be too nice, give in, not hold boundaries for themselves. And you might not recognize that that's a defense mechanism right off the bat, but it is. Endless explaining and rationalizing is another one. This one for me, Amy, it took me a little while to really accept this about myself because that was definitely one of mine. I could be in a conversation with somebody and they would ask me a fairly simple, fairly innocuous question, which I literally could have answered with a yes or no. But there was something inside of me that was suddenly afraid that their question was like veiled criticism and that they weren't just looking for yes or no, that I had to explain myself. And so I would give this like mini dissertation of an answer to which they're kind of going like, okay, thanks. Like, just yes would have been fine. And so endless explaining or rationalizing is how it's phrased on the survey. And that was one for me that it took me some convincing actually to realize like, oh, like I was convinced, Amy. I was convinced. I'm like, but no, you needed the explanation. You were looking. And they're like, no, really not. Like, whoa, that's all my internal stuff. That's crazy.
It is so wild how those internal fears paint the way that we see the world outside of us. Our eyes are just an extension of our brain. And so the way we interpret situations and the intention, like we're such good storytellers on behalf of other people.
I know.
Yep. That we
yeah.
like paint the story of intention and it's like, no, that's really just your insecurities you've superimposed on them.
Totally. Every time, like one of our favorite phrases to share with people is, what bugs me about you is really about me.
Mm-hmm. Yep. If you got it, you spot it.
And that is part of it, right? Like I might see that in somebody else and I'm like, ooh, I do that too and I don't like that. And that's part of it. The other thing is that story piece you're talking about. It's like my brain is going to make up a story about why you're behaving the way that you're behaving, but it's not just making up a story. It's making it about me. Like I'm convinced that you're late meeting me for the movies because I'm not important enough to you. And I'm convinced that that guy over there keeps interrupting me in the meeting because he doesn't think that I'm very important. And I can just make that the story all the time because that's the story that I tell myself. But it hangs out in my subconscious, but I'm so convinced that these stories I'm telling myself are real and I want to blame the rest of the world and I'm convinced. And so like the defense mechanisms, like that is that we're operating that unconscious place. And so that's one of the biggest ways that we work to raise people's awareness.
I think it's so great for leaders listening. And we've got a ton of leaders who really want to be conscious. That's why they subscribe to this podcast, to kind of do that self-assessment of just your organization and your leadership team of, are there some of those defense mechanisms that Dr. Laura mentioned? Are they prevalent in our meetings that we're having? And where do they pop up? And if we tried to give each other feedback or accountability, or if there was any level of challenging, is this a disruptor? I think it's interesting to reflect on.
For sure. And part of what we like to teach too, because I think so many of the people that we work with are high achievers who probably have perfectionist tendencies. And the goal of this work, as I see it, isn't to never become defensive. In fact, the defense mechanisms, it's not a flaw, it's actually a feature. The fact that we are working to protect, we have the psychological immune system, like everything about, I think, how we are here is, designed or evolved to keep us safe and to keep us going as a species. And so I also don't want people to vilify their own defense mechanisms. So we talk about it as a recovery model, not a perfection model. You're going to get defensive. I have a defensive reaction literally every single day. Every day. There's something. Most of the time it's not big. Like most of the time it's not some huge thing, but like there's little things. And the key for me is that I'm aware now. I notice it. And I'm able to much faster identify, what is the story in my head? What am I telling myself here? Okay, how is this actually about my own insecurities? How is this rooted in my own self-acceptance gaps? And then I can recover that much faster from the defense mechanism to come back to a much more open and collaborative space. So for leaders listening, I guarantee you, you not only see these defense mechanisms, but you yourself engage them. Please don't beat yourself up. I think that's the opposite of the point. Actually, you want to give yourself compassion in those moments. You want to give compassion to the person who's exhibiting the defense mechanism, if at all possible, which takes practice. But yeah, like give yourself some grace. Just be gentle. Slowing down, as you know, Amy, is huge in the process of shifting from the more unconscious state and those like automatic default reactions to a much more intentional, conscious reaction.
It's I think that when we can catch the judgments that we have about the world around us, if we can catch them, right? Because many of them are automatic. We do not know. They are deep rooted in our belief system. They kind of pass by quickly without any level of awareness or consciousness around them. But if you can catch those judgments and then, be able to self-reflect of like, oh, that's interesting. I just had that thought about him, or I had that thought about her. Where did that come from? What is, that can be such a special place for any of us who wish to be more conscious, because some of you may be listening to this and maybe you're like, I love this stuff, but I work for an organization that does not prioritize this and they will not invest in something like this. And then Dr. Laura and I would challenge you and be like, why do you work there if you're compromising your values? But okay, that's another conversation.
Totally. I absolutely would. I would ask that question.
Yeah. But I think that it is, what can you do? I think that's awareness. And then that reflection is such a cool place to start of, I do that all the time. The best place to practice it? Social media. You want your buttons pushed. You want to see how quickly you can feel frustrated and want to give people a piece of your mind. Read the comments. And
the comments. It's so true. On like the happiest little post, I can still look at comments and find, people in so much pain.
Yes. And that's the thing, is when you can look at it with compassion and be like, ooh, I just see that they're missing love and acceptance for themselves. Because if they had it, they wouldn't feel the need, to take it from someone else. But it's a good place to practice some consciousness.
Oh my gosh. It's so funny to me that you've said that, because I feel like I avoided comments on social media for a really long time for that reason, because I found it to be so triggering and just really unpleasant. And my social media, I love my feed. It's very curated and it's a very inspiring place for me. I get beautiful messages and wonderful reminders or things that just make me laugh. And with some of the political things happening, I started to broaden my search just to avoid echo chambers, and woo, man, so much. So yeah, it's a really good practice. The other joke that I'll often make too, if you want to kind of test your consciousness, is go back and hang out with your family of origin around a holiday.
Yeah.
And see how you do.
Ram Dass says that, a spiritual teacher. He says, if you think you're so enlightened, go spend the weekend with your family. And it's such hardwired stuff, right? There's so much muscle memory that's hardwired and developed. And yeah, if we can catch ourselves between reaction and response, it is a good exercise. Yeah.
Yeah. And the whole, you mentioned earlier, some people listening maybe don't work for an organization that would ever invest in this kind of work. And that's actually part of what's driven a little bit of it's not a full pivot, because I still do a ton of work with organizations, but one of the decisions that I've made more recently is to move back into the space of working with just the individuals themselves. Because some of the people that I work with in the organizational context don't want to be there. That's not that common, which is great. Most of them are actually really, really grateful. If not by, not on day 1, by day 3, they're like, whoa, this is crazy. This is really helpful and useful and changing my life. But I know that there are so many people out there that their companies won't invest in it. They think that it's touchy-feely, or I don't even know what label they might want to put on it, but they're so hungry for this kind of growth. And so my whole focus on radical self-acceptance as a concept is really meant to reach those, high-achieving, driven self-starters who don't have their organization's support in this, but are really looking to change their relationship with themselves. Find all those judgments that are popping up not just for others, but for themselves, and do really deep work to transform that whole relationship, because it literally makes everything in your life easier when you have higher self-acceptance.
Ladies, imagine taking time away to work on you. Meditation, yoga, transformational work, a chance to have grand adventures and build lasting relationships. Desiree Garcia and I founded High Vibe Tribe Retreats to create just that. And if you're curious about joining us on our next retreat, head over to highvibetriberetreat.com, link in the show notes.
The root of everything comes from that relationship with self. And so whether you're doing this with individuals who can do is it self-driven coursework that they can do, or is there like group cohorts, or what's the way that you're bringing this to the world?
Yeah, there's really two primary things at the moment. And so one of is the live workshop that I do. It's virtual, and it's over 5 weeks. And then there's also the self-paced one it's not out yet, but it's coming really soon.
Okay. To be continued. Do you know the release date? Do you know when it's going to be launched?
I think it's going to be Q3 at the latest of 2025.
All right. So 2025, it'll be this year. When you're doing that work with people, do you go straight into sort of the where am I and where is my relationship with self, and then work from that lens to outside? Do you start with maybe problems, challenges, experiences people might have, and then kind of work it inward to where solution is? I'm just curious of the process.
Yeah, the live workshop that I do, we've actually always started out with a survey. So before people, before they get in there, we have them complete this survey so they can just self-assess, where am I on this right now? And then as we move through the workshop sessions, I'm always connecting it back to like key parts of that survey, so they can always like look and see when it comes to this, this element of my own radical self-acceptance, how did I score myself? And so where do I want to focus more of my energy and attention? And I think that what really draws a lot of people in to do this kind of work, I often talk about it, Amy, as this is a stress detox experience, because there's a really, really strong connection between radical self-acceptance and someone's experience of stress in this lifetime. And I'd be happy to, I know you know more about this too than, many of your listeners do, but I'm happy to get into it.
Yeah, please. Yeah. Let's talk about the connection between the two.
Okay. So the first part of this is usually where I'm really glad that nobody can throw anything at me, because the first line is stress is a choice. So getting into that accountability piece. I don't know. I'm projecting onto the world because I was pissed when I first heard that. Like, I did not want to believe that was true. I thought I was being blamed for my stress, and I thought that people were suggesting that I shouldn't be stressed. Like, it was just, I just got so defensive straight away. And then I leaned into this 1% rule, which is a really useful practice for me to keep an open mind. So if something feels wrong or untrue, instead of being rigidly closed, I'll say, is there even 1% truth in this? Which usually I find way more than 1% of it's true.
Yeah. I've always heard so the world has demands. There's no such thing as stressful events or, the world has demands, and stress is our personal response to the demands. And so back to your stress is a choice. The only thing that we can control in life is how we think, feel, and respond. There is nothing else in this life that we can fully control. And even some of that within ourselves, we don't have full control over, because subconscious and unconscious mind is running it. And so if we think about that, how we think, feel, and respond, then yes, stress is absolutely something that it's up to us and how we interpret it and what meaning we make of it, right?
Yes, that's exactly it. And the way that I talk about it is there's no inherent stressor, right? And you've already said that. There's literally not any one event that every single human being on earth would agree would stress them out. Literally nothing. Even who were like, apocalypse, end of the world, about to die. I'm like, yeah, no. There's plenty of people that would not be stressed out by that. So yeah, that means that stress comes from the meaning that I'm putting on it. And to go even one layer deeper than that, it's how is the meaning that I'm putting on the situation threatening how I want to see myself? So when I'm putting meaning on a situation that threatens my self-concept or threatens my identity, that's where stress comes from. And so if your listeners like have wrapped their head around that, really that means that if you were to achieve, full enlightenment, full self-acceptance, which that's not even really my goal, I'm just going to keep working on improving it, then there is no threat to your self-concept. There is nothing about yourself that you could learn that would be distressing. It could always be a source for you of, I want to learn and grow and improve, but it doesn't have to be something that is consumed with judgment or brings up a sense of fear because it doesn't fit with who you want to be. So there's actually a lot of self-acceptance includes having fluidity in your own self-concept, being fluid in your own identity, which is wild for people because we spend so much of our lives trying to actually get clear about what it is and kind of trying to make it something that's firm because it's a source of direction for us. Like, oh, if I know who I am, if I know what's important to me, then I'll know how to make all these decisions. And so, yeah, there's so many paradoxes, I think, in this space of like growing self-awareness and higher consciousness that are so powerful when you can get in there and understand the nuances of it all.
And it's really what almost everybody's searching for, because if we polled the world, and especially the world is very polarizing right now. It is very politically polarizing. There is a lot of stuff happening very quickly. And no matter what side of the aisle or your belief system, if we polled the world and said, what do you want? What do you want? What do you want to feel? People would say, I want to feel loved, safe, healthy. It would be the same thing. So we all want the same greater good. We have personal preferences for how to get there. And if we are so focused purely, on our personal preference for the world around us, we create more challenges. We get more disconnected from what we really want within. So I think it's interesting to consider that like what we all want is exactly the same. Our behavior that blocks that and makes others responsible for that is different and interesting, and it can create a whole lot of chaos. My own personal belief system is we are good and we are whole. There's nothing you need to learn. There's nothing you need to get to. It is an unlearning. There's all of these rules that we've kind of have hardwired within us, or belief systems, or I have to be this. There's a lot of have tos. And so I'm sure a lot of the work that you're doing is the work of unlearning. It's not creating something that's not already there. It's just getting to the heart of it that's been covered up with a lot of bullshit belief systems and actions.
I totally agree with what you're saying. And I would love to, can I bring up a really old movie?
Sure. Yeah.
Spoiler alert it like crazy. So this is a total spoiler alert. I'm going to talk about the movie Memento for a second. Have you seen it?
I don't know that movie. I mean, I've heard of it, but I can't think of the plots or anything.
Are you okay with me spoiling it?
Totally.
So it's a Christopher Nolan film, really well done. And I'll do a short version of it, I promise. This man is investigating the death of his wife, but he cannot form new memories. So he was injured also in the attack, and he cannot form new memories. And so he is continuously trying to make sense of his world and trying to move things forward, but he can't form new memories. So he's always sort of operating from a blank slate and then trying to put the pieces together. And the whole movie plays backwards. So you're kind of stepping into a scene like he is. You don't know what has just happened. And when we get to the end of the film, we learn that he's actually already solved this. He's already solved it. But he didn't feel like he had any purpose in his life. Once he solved it, he felt like a sense of emptiness and meaninglessness. And so he kept creating a new mystery for himself to solve. He had this huge police file with all of this stuff that was redacted, just blacked out. He gave himself this challenge over and over again to try to solve the case. And I feel like it's such a good metaphor for what I think we're doing here. It's like we chose to not know, we chose to forget a whole bunch of information about who we truly are and our own essence. But we're going through this process and this experience that we call life in order to like kind of unlearn and get back to that wholeness. So I don't know. I still recommend you watch it.
Yeah,
It's really good.
I'll find it. I promise. It sounds like a great concept. And yeah, I could, the correlation between what we do for ourselves you and I do this work, but we are still, I tell my clients all the time, I'm like, this is my therapy, you guys.
Oh yeah. I say I'm like student number 1 or student 0, whatever you want to call it. Amy, I have the word journey tattooed on my wrist, on my inner wrist, as a reminder to myself, it's not about the band. I get that joke from people a lot. They're great, but no, this is just like I'm on the journey. There is no destination in my mind with the work while we're here in this physical dimension. I think that we are here to continuously, unwind, unlearn a lot of that. I do talk about like learning and growing and developing, but I agree with your characterization of it that we're really unlearning all of the distortions in who we think we are and all of the flaws that we think that we have.
When people hit that, first off, I'd love to know how you define self-acceptance. What is included if somebody is like, oh, yeah, I do or I do not accept myself? What are some of the characteristics of somebody who is in full self-acceptance?
So when I define it, I describe it as simply being okay with who you are right now, including your flaws and imperfections and your talents and your strengths. So just, are you okay with who you are right now without changing a thing? And some of the characteristics that stand out to me a lot. So first of all, one you've already talked about, Amy, which is judgment. As soon as I notice myself judging, whether I'm judging myself or somebody else, there's a self-acceptance gap there. There's something within me that I have not been willing or able to accept yet. And that is the source of my judgment. Not being willing to celebrate. So accomplishing things, but very quickly minimizing it or focusing immediately on the problems or what went wrong or why it wasn't enough. I also focus on this idea of like moving milestones.
Oh yeah. We hit that. Yay. 5 seconds. Kick the can down the line.
I know. Like because I find like people will set this bar for themselves, which is really high. And it probably takes them longer to hit it than they want. And they're beating themselves up for that. It's a self-acceptance gap. And then they often they haven't even quite hit it yet before it moves. I did this to myself over and over again. I had this piece of art that I thought was just gorgeous and like extravagant. And I just loved it. I was like, man, one day I would love to own this art. And I kept setting a goal for myself. When I hit this goal, I'm going to reward myself by buying this art. And I moved that goal on myself like at least 5 times. And it took kind of the perfect storm of variables to align for me to actually finally buy it for myself a couple of years ago. But I think that a lot of people who have difficulty with self-acceptance are moving that bar, and that's part of why they struggle to celebrate. If you struggle to accept praise or compliments, it feels really uncomfortable, or you're like, oh, I don't want to, or you immediately feel like you have to return the compliment, or you want to deflect and like make it go away. These are all signs that you have a self-acceptance gap. And then the biggest one that I think impacts people's lives the most is relationships. So those defense mechanisms that I talked about. So that triggered state that happens for all of us, like that getting dysregulated in communication and relationship with somebody else. There's something about the dynamic that is triggering an insecurity for you. So there's something within you that you have not yet accepted. And that painful inner reaction is what causes the triggered reaction, which is usually really ineffective from a conflict resolution perspective. Things spiral, it goes really south. So those are a few things. And I also invite people to look at self-acceptance as something that can fluctuate depending on what's going on in your life, the time, who you're with. Like that's how most people experience it. And what if your self-acceptance wasn't at the whim of what's happening externally? What if it wasn't at the whim of who you're talking to? Like, we all kind of know that feeling when you're with somebody and you just feel like comfortable and at peace, and it's easy to be vulnerable. You don't feel like you have to hide any part of yourself. I hope everybody has had that experience in their lifetime. And we also know that experience of somebody else where it's like, yeah, I don't know if I really want them to know these things about me. I'm afraid that they're going to judge me. I think that they're going to put me down or make fun of me or use this against me later. And so that feeling of like, I have higher self-acceptance with this person, I have lower self-acceptance with this person. What if you felt more in control of that all the time? Just you. And around anybody, you can feel that sense of calm and peace and acceptance of who you are right now.
I think it's such a gift for people to give to themselves, but also the ripple effect of the world. There were a group of researchers and who, you may know this study, that they studied the electromagnetic output of various emotions. So they brought a group of people together, holding various emotions, measuring what really like what's the vibration of the room become. And they expected love to be the highest output, because many of us do, right? We're like, hey, love is pretty good. And like all the good things come from that. But they were really blown away when they asked the people in the room to hold a vibration of authenticity, of like just fully being yourself and fully aligned with yourself, which requires self-acceptance in order to be you. And that it outpaced love. It went beyond the vibration of love. And listen, all things are energy, it's not woo-woo, it's science, and all things are energy. And nothing is, energy cannot be created or destroyed, but it's transformed. And that's pretty powerful. If we can be aligned with our own authenticity, think about the energy you bring to the room, to the day, to the people you work around as a leader, how that impacts the ideas and the things that you move forward. It's a grand ripple effect. And you're going to feel better inside your own body, which is pretty damn good, because you're stuck in that body forever until death do you part. So I love that you're helping people do this. And I would imagine that's the ripple effect of good that you see too, is that, at the core, like I said, I love how aligned our work is. Like the conscious habit, our tagline is the root of result begins within. And that relationship with self is everything. And so when you help leaders or individuals get to this place, my gut says you hear pretty great stories about what's happening outside of them. Do you have a favorite like story of someone who's like, this is the major change that happened in my life and it all started from this, love and acceptance within?
I think my favorite story of this, there was a client that I worked with probably about 7 years ago now, 7 or 8 years ago. And the workforce was actually mostly blue collar, which was not the norm for me. I was mostly doing organizational work with more, white collar employees. But this CEO was wanting to do a massive culture change. He was brought in. It was a family-owned business that had been around for a long time. I actually talk about it on my own podcast. I had him on. We talked about it. And he put the entire company through like these 3-day workshops with us. And my favorite story to emerge from that was how many of those employees came and shared like tearful gratitude with him as the CEO, because it was transforming their lives at home. His name is Tom Cannon. He's an amazing leader. And he was so bought into bringing this to the organization and bringing this into the culture. But like, he was so blown away by how much the employees felt it touched their personal lives, and that it was changing how they were communicating with their wives and their husbands. It was changing relationships that they had with their kids. I was brought to tears by just listening to him speak about it, like so many of them were. And I just feel like that's where you can see and feel how much this work really matters.
It really does. It is important work. If we can learn how to navigate the most important human in our lives, us.
Yes.
Or the most challenging human in our lives, us,
Yes.
And without judgment, it just kind of is. It's just, and learn how to navigate that, then it does enrich all of the relationships and experiences outside of us. So thank you for doing this work. What a ripple effect of good and love, and what a contribution to world peace that you are providing.
Thank you. And to you as well, Amy.
Thank you. I would love for us to have this conversation extend for another hour, maybe a part 2 sometime in the future. But I had a chance to take an assessment online, and I'd love for you to share just a little bit about what that assessment is and how our listeners can find it.
Yeah, for sure. So we just call it our self-acceptance quiz. And so your listeners can go to selfacceptancequiz.com if they want to check it out. It's really fast to take, maybe 3 to 5 minutes. And you'll get a report pretty immediately that's going to reflect back, hey, in this moment in time, based on how you answered these items, this is where you are in this 2x2. And the 2x2 is the self-acceptance. And we do dichotomize it, right? We make it like high or low. But we also then look at self-improvement. And we didn't talk too much about that today, but a lot of people are afraid that accepting yourself means that you're not going to have any more growth or improvement. And that is like the primary hurdle that I have to work with self-achievers on for them to overcome so they even want to practice self-acceptance. But self-acceptance and self-improvement coexist. Like they are not opposite ends of the continuum. Remember, the opposite of self-acceptance is self-judgment, not self-improvement. So you can focus on growing and improving through a self-judging lens, or you can do it through a self-accepting lens. And research is actually pretty clear that you're going to learn and grow faster when you focus on improving through a self-accepting lens. And so if your listeners choose to take the quiz, then they're going to get their results and then some coaching emails as like a follow-on, so that if they want to learn, how can they work to grow their self-acceptance while still having that high self-improvement, they'll learn more about how to do that.
Awesome. Well, I really hope our listeners go check that out. And I know that we have a shit ton of high achievers that listen to this, including you and I, who are hardwired, high achievers. And I think that that is the hurdle, for sure. The hurdle of high achievers is they're tired of the constant chase, but then they're terrified of who they'll be if they stop. And so I love your, like self-acceptance and, self-improvement they're not opposites. I love that. I think many people need to hear that and remind themselves of that. It's really great. So thank you so much for spending time with us. Anywhere else that our listeners can find you?
Yeah, I'm on LinkedIn quite a bit. I love to post. I post probably almost every day. And if anybody has questions for me, things that I didn't get into or you want to learn more, just please tell me that you heard me here on Amy's show, and I will happily connect with you and answer anything that comes up.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I have a big, long page of notes from our conversation together, and I just thoroughly enjoyed our chat. So thank you so much, Dr. Laura.
Thank you, Amy, for having me.
Before we wrap up this episode, here are my 3 takeaways from our conversation. So, number 1, consciousness is all about awareness. If we look at the definitions we've had over the years on conscious habit, that might be a fun episode to put together, by the way. It's like everybody's definitions together. But the more we cultivate self-awareness, the better we can lead, we can grow, we can respond rather than react, the more we are aligned with consciousness. And, when we're on our subconscious or unconscious mind, it's not that it's all negative, but we are less in control of it. And therefore, less change and growth is happening when we are stuck in those patterns because they're simply repeated over and over again. So for us at any point in time, when we want things to shift or to change or to grow for us, we've got to be able to cultivate a deeper awareness so that we can cultivate deeper consciousness to get there. Number 2, radical self-acceptance is a game changer. Where do you feel like you are if you were kind of being self-reflective on accepting yourself, not for what you do, not for what you know, but simply for who you are? And to remind ourselves that full acceptance doesn't mean we no longer improve. I think it just means we stop resisting who we are right now. We stop thinking we need to be someone different, and we look at it more as an evolution than a means of proving. I think that's a good self-reflection for all of us to have. Am I self-improving as a means to prove to myself or get to a place where I then feel like I'm good enough. That is a never-ending chase if that's the path that we're following. And number 3, stress isn't something that just happens to us. It is a response to what's happening to us. That was another place that we were incredibly aligned, right? Is like stress is our response to the demands around us. So the meaning that we assign to those situations, they really determine how we experience them. Is this a good experience or a negative experience? It all starts in the interpretation of the mind. And if we can recognize that, going back to number 1, if we can have a deeper consciousness about that. Also, number 2, if we have a deep level of self-acceptance about that, it's likely that we will see those experiences differently. It will be transformed because our inner world paints our outer world. So a reminder, stress isn't happening to us, it's a response. And it really stems from the story that we are choosing to believe is true. If the story isn't working, rewrite it. Of course, we always invite you to share these episodes with somebody that you love if it feels like it resonates with you. Maybe it's a colleague, maybe it's a friend, maybe it's somebody else on your team. But if you think they can get something from it, we encourage you to share the love. Together, we can really create a conscious movement. And man, does it take a collective. If you and I are not connected yet, please connect on LinkedIn with me. I would love for us to keep the conversation going there. And reach out and find Dr. Laura Gallaher on LinkedIn as well. You can follow all of the great things that she and her team are doing.
Thanks for listening to the Conscious Habit Podcast. If you dug this episode, we'd love it if you would subscribe, rate, and review this podcast. And if you're into this consciousness thing, if you like this conversation and you want to meet more like-minded people, head on over to Facebook and join the Conscious Habit community. Until next time, do the world a favor and go love yourself.